Hello Divination and welcome. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to create a 3-step blurb reveal on hover with Divi. This is the final result we're aiming to achieve, so without wasting a lot of time, let's dive in and let's get started. Alright, so let's start by creating a brand new page. So I'm going to come over here to Pages, click on Add New. So I'm just going to call my page 3-step, but of course you can call your page whatever you want. And then I'm going to click on Use Divi Builder. Now here, the first thing we need to do is to build from scratch. However, you can also build this on an existing page, but the technique is all the same. So I'm going to click here on build from scratch, and then I'm going to start by adding a background gradient on my section. So I'm going to come over here to my section settings, click on background, and then I'm going to click on this gradient tab. Click on the plus button and add my first color. So I'm going to paste my color in here. And then I'm also going to paste my second color. And by the way, if you want to use the exact same colors as I'm using throughout this tutorial, I will leave a link to the post in the show notes below. And you can also download this layout if, of course, you don't want to follow this step by step. If you go to the post, you're able to download this layout. Alright, so now that I have my two colors, the next stage is to set my gradient direction. So this needs to be 122. And the next thing we need to do here is to go on the hover gradient, because this pretty much is done. So we're going to come back over here to the background section, and then we're going to click on this arrow that's pointing up. So this is for our hover effects. So I'm going to click on the hover tab. And then I'm also going to start adding my colors. So my first color here is going to be black. So I'm going to come over here and I'm just going to drag the slider up down until I get to black. And then I'm also going to add my second color. Now my second color here is going to be white. So I'm just going to select it. And then now it's time to add our gradient type. So by default, as you can see, it's set to linear. We want this to be set to radial. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. Now I'm going to set my radial direction. And here we need to set it to top. And then we need to set our start and end position. So by default here, we're at 0%. So we're going to add 36 to that. And then our end position is going to be 26. The next step now is to add a bit of padding to our section. So I'm going to come over here to my design tab, spacing, and I'm going to add padding of 1 VW, both to the top and the bottom. Now, to make sure nothing exceeds the section container, we're going to hide the overflow in the visibility settings. So to do that, we're going to come over here to the advanced tab, click on visibility, and we need to go to the horizontal overflow and set this to hidden. And then we're also going to go on the vertical overflow and set this to hidden as well. Now it's time to start adding our rows. So I'm going to save this. And then I'm going to start by clicking this plus button. So the row we need to add is just a single column. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. And in here, we're going to add a text module. So I'm going to go ahead and select it. In fact, I'm just going to search for it here. Save me scrolling. Then I'm going to select it. So all we need to do here is to just add our title. And our title is going to be called The 3 Essential Steps. So as you can see, this is set to paragraph. We need to highlight this and then assign a heading to this. So we're going to assign this to heading 2. And then now we're going to go in and stylize our heading. So we're going to come over here to design, heading text, make sure you're on the heading 2 tab. And then we're going to start by changing our font from default to Montserrat. If you don't have it set here, all you need to do is to just click here and search for the font. It's a free font to use, so go ahead and select it. All right, so let's go to the font weights. So I'm going to set this to semi-bold, and the color is going to be white, and the alignment needs to be center. Now let's set our text size. So by default, it's on 26 pixels. I'm going to set this to 2 VW, and then I'm going to go ahead and set the letter spacing. So here on the letter spacing, we're just going to reduce this, the space between the letters and set this to -2 pixels. So pretty much we're done here. I'm going to save. Now it's time to add another row. So I'm just going to click here on this plus button, and the column structure is going to be 3 equal columns. I'm going to go ahead and select that. So before we go in and start adding our modules, I'm just going to go in and add some padding to our row. So I'm going to click here on this gear icon, and then I'm going to come over here to design, spacing, and set a padding of 2 VW, both to the top and the bottom. And to do that, we're just going to activate our chain, or you can manually type it here. So I'm going to activate my chain, Now, the next step is very important. We're going to add a bit of CSS code. And this CSS code is to make sure all your columns appear next to each other on smaller screen sizes. So I'm going to go in now and add my CSS code. And by the way, to save you typing, I'll leave a link to the post in the show notes below where you can just copy this CSS snippet. All right, so to add our CSS, you need to come over here to the Advanced tab, Custom CSS, and add it in the main element. So I'm just going to paste it in here. So now it's time to add all our elements, our modules. So I'm going to click on this plus button, search for my text module and select it. So the only thing we're going to do here is to just highlight all this text and add this down arrow. So we're going to animate this arrow later on in the tutorial. So let's go now in and customize this and make it look much better. So the first thing we're going to do is to come over here to design. All right, so let's customize this arrow. So I'm going to come over here to text. And then first thing we need to do is to make sure that everything is aligned center. So I'm going to click here. Next, I am going to, in fact, we need to align you to the right. Next, we need to add a text color to this. So I'm going to just come over here, click on this eyedropper tool and paste my color just like that. And now we need to add the size, and the size is going to be 4VW instead of 14 pixels. Okay, so you can see, you could barely see it here because the color is very close to our background. So now it's time to add our margins. So I'm going to scroll all the way down here to spacing and add my top margin. And I'm also going to add a bottom margin of 8VW. Okay, so now we have a bit of space under this arrow. So the next step now is to go to transform, and here we're going to go to transform rotate. So all we're going to do here is to go to the left and set this to 45 degrees. And now let's add our animation styles. So I'm going to come over here to animation. We're going to go with slide. Animation direction needs to be set to center, so make sure that is center. And the animation delay needs to be 1000 milliseconds. Okay, so I'm just going to leave this as it is. In fact, we need to enter 1000 milliseconds here. So pretty much we're done here. I'm going to go ahead and save. Now I'm also going to create these arrows on these two columns. So to make things easier for me, I'm just going to duplicate this twice and then make sure you go in and make the changes necessary for the design. So I'm just going to drag this into the right columns, and then I'm going to go into my second column here and click on this module settings. I'm going to go ahead and select that. So this time I'm going to set our alignment to center. So I'm going to click here on design, text, and the alignment, instead of right, I'm going to center it. Next, I'm going to go to the color and just make sure that I have my correct color here. So this color is fine. We're going to leave it as it is. And for my size, it needs to be set to 4VW, as you can see. So we're going to leave that as it is as well. And then moving on, we're going to go to spacing. And for the top margin, we're going to set it to 1VW. So I'm going to come over here. And then here, we're going to set this to 1VW. So for the bottom margin, we don't need to worry about this for this one here. So I'm going to delete that. Now, moving on, we're going to go to the animation now. So scroll down here, click on animation, and the style we're going to go with here is slide. Animation direction, make sure it's set to center, and pretty much that's all we need to do here. Now let's go to the third module. Oh, in fact, before we go to the third module, we want to make sure that this arrow is pointing down. Okay, so let's go ahead and fix that. So I'm going to go to transform, and we added 45 degrees here, so let's just delete that and set it to 0. So now the arrow is pointing down, although it's not very easy to see, but it's part of the design. All right, so let's go ahead and save this. Now let's go to our final arrow here in the third column. So I'm going to click here on my module settings. Next, I'm going to come over here to design, text, and now on the text alignment, this needs to be aligned left. So I'm going to go ahead and choose left. Our color is fine. Our size is fine as well. But the most important thing here is to add our margin, which is going to be -3. So I'm going to come over here to spacing, and our margin here is -3. That's great. I'm going to delete this. Next, I'm going to go to transform rotate. And this time on transform rotate, I'm going to set this to 315 degrees. So now you can see the arrow is now pointing towards the right. Okay, so pretty much that's really looking good. Now let's go to the animation and make sure everything is looking okay. So I'm going to click here on animation and make sure it's set to slide, direction centered, and then the animation delay, it needs to be at 1000 milliseconds. All right, so pretty much we're done here. I'm going to save this. Now it's time to add the third row. So I'm going to click here on this plus button, and the row needs to have 3 columns. I'm going to go ahead and select that. Now, the first thing we need to do here is to customize our width. So I'm going to come over here to my row settings, click on design, sizing. So by default, our width here is set to 80%. So we want this to be 100%. And the maximum width, in order for this to be edge to edge, this needs to be set to 100% as well. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. Now let's add some padding to our row. So I'm going to come over here to spacing. And our padding here is going to be 2VW, and this needs to be applied both to the top and the bottom. And I'm also going to add some padding both to the left and the right, and this needs to be 10VW. Activate my chain. And as we did before, we're going to add this line of CSS code to make sure that all our columns appear next to each other on smaller screen devices. So I'm going to come over here to the Advanced tab, Custom CSS, and in the main element, I'm going to paste my CSS code. Now, if you want to use the exact same CSS code or the exact same settings as I'm using throughout this tutorial, I will leave a link to the post in the show notes below. All right, so finally, as we did before as well, we're going to come over here to visibility and just make sure that our horizontal overflow is set to hidden, and the same for vertical. Okay, so pretty much this is looking great. Now let's go ahead and save. Next, we're going to come over here and add a text module. So I'm going to search for it and select it. And we're just going to add a number 1 to this module. Now, before we proceed, I just want to go in and add the background colors. So I'm going to come over here to background. And this is going to be a gradient. So I'm going to click on this second tab, click this plus button and add my first color. Paste it in here, add my second color. Again, I'm going to paste it in here. And then finally, my gradient direction needs to be set to 122. Now let's go to the text settings and customize our font. So I'm going to come over here, click on text, change it from default to Monsterrat. And this time we're going to set this to ultra bold. Next, we're going to make sure that this is centered. So I'm going to center it. And I'm going to set my text color to white. So here it is. I'm going to select it. Now, if you don't have white here on your palette, you can just go to your recent colors that are used, and then you can see it here. Or you can just click on this eyedropper tool and choose white. Next, I'm going to set my text size, and this needs to be set to 2VW. So I'm just going to come over here, set this to 2VW, and for my line height, this needs to be set to 1. Now it's time to add my spacing. So we just want to add a bit of breathing space for our number 1 here. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to scroll down here to spacing, and I'm going to add my padding here of 1VW, and I'm going to apply this both to the top and the bottom. Now let's head over here to our borders. So what we're going to do here is we're going to add a border style. So before we add the style, let's start by adding rounded corners here. So I'm going to come to the top and set this to 20 pixels. Now here's the thing, if your chain here is deactivated, these values will only be applied to each and every corner. But if the chain is activated like this, you'll notice that in your design, this will be applied to all the corners. All right. So now that I have all this set, pretty much this is all that we need to do. So I'm going to save this, and then I'm just going to clone this a few times and apply it to the remaining columns. So I'm going to come over here. So there's 2 ways to do this. You can either duplicate this and then drag it into position, or you can use some shortcuts. I prefer using shortcuts, and the shortcut is Command C if you're on a Mac, if you're to copy. If you're on a PC, it's Control C to copy. All right. And then to paste, it's Command V if you're on a Mac. If you're on a PC, it's Control V, just like that. Right, so now that we have this in place, all we have to do now is to just do some inline editing. I'm just going to change this to number 2. Come over here, change this to number 3. So now that we have this in place, the next stage now is to go to each and every one of these columns and add some blurbs. So let me add my first one here. So I'm going to click this plus button and select my blurb. And on the top here, we're just going to call this step 1. And then here, I'm just going to leave this default text as it is. And now let me choose my icon. So I'm going to come over here and click here on image and icon. So by default, you're presented here with an image, but we want an icon instead. So I'm going to click here on use icon, and I'm going to go with this icon right here. Now let's go in and add our background color here. So I'm going to click here on background and set this to white. Next, let's go and work out on our icon settings. So I'm going to click here on this little brush tool, and now this will take us directly to our icon settings, which is pretty cool. Saves us a few clicks. So the first thing I want to do is to add my icon color, and I'm going to paste it in here. Next, I'm going to make sure my icon placement is set to the top, and use icon font size is used if you want to adjust the size of your icon. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to click here on use icon font size, and you can either use this slider here and drag it, and this will customize the size of the icon. But in this case, we're going to add a specific value. So I'm going to go ahead and set it to 4VW. Next, let's go into our text settings. So again, I'm just going to hover over my area here, click on my first one here, which is the title. So first of all, I'm going to change my font from default to Montserrat, and then I'm going to change my weight to bold. Next, for the text alignment, I'm going to make sure it's centered, and title text color needs to be set to black. So I'm going to come over here, drag the slider all the way down to black. And the text size is going to be 1VW. Now it's time to add my body text settings. So again, I'm just going to hover over my content here, click on this brush tool, and this will take me to my settings. So the first thing here is to make sure everything's aligned center. My body text size is going to be 0.6 VW, and the line height is going to be 2.5. Now, as you can see, my text here is way too close to the edges. So in order for us to fix this, we need to come over here to spacing and add some padding. So I'm going to start here with adding top and bottom padding. And then I'm also going to add left and right. And my left and right padding here is going to be 1VW. Activate the chain. And now you can see we have enough breathing space, and our design looks much better now. And the next stage now is to go to the borders and add rounded corners. And I'm going to set this to 20 pixels. And as you can see, this has been applied to all the sides. Right, so we're also going to add a bit of depth by adding a subtle box shadow. So let's go ahead now and add our box shadow. And the option I'm going to go with is this one here. Next, I'm going to change my color. And as I mentioned before, if you want to use the exact same colors as I'm using, I will leave a link to the post in the show notes below. All right, so I'm going to come over here, click on the brush tool, and I'm just going to highlight this and paste my color. Now, the color I'm adding here is pretty much between the brackets, so make sure you add your colors here between the brackets. Okay, so I've added my color. Now we can add a bit of animation. So I'm going to scroll down here to animation, and I'm going to go with slide. So my slide here needs to be centered and 100 milliseconds to the delay. So I'm going to go ahead and enter it in here and then save. All right, so as you can see, we've done a lot of work here. And again, to save us time in going through all these steps, all I have to do now is to copy and paste. So Command C over here, Command V, Command V. If you're on a PC, it's Control V. So again, I'm going to come in here, set this to step 2, step 3. So notice that I've done inline editing. I don't have to go into the module to actually add the text or the amendments. So the next stage now is to go into row 3 settings and make some modifications. So I can't really see where I am here. So what I'm going to do is to click on these 3 little dots here, expand settings, click here on wireframe view. And now we can see that it's easier now to go to our row. So I'm going to click here on row settings, design. And what I need to do here is to make some default settings. So I'm going to come to sizing, and over here on my height, I'm going to set this to 6VW. And then I also need to add a hover state. So I'm going to click here on this arrow that's pointing up, click here on hover, and then we're going to set this to auto, and then we're going to save. Next, I'm going to come over here to my section settings. And by the way, if you want to see the changes happening on the desktop, so I'm going to come over here to desktop view, and you can see all your changes happening here. So what we're going to do here is we're also going to set a height of 7VW. So I'm going to come over here to design, sizing, and then on my height, I'm going to set this to 7VW. And then we're also going to go into this little arrow to access our hover settings. I'm going to click here on hover. Now on hover, we want to set this to auto. So you notice what happens here on hover. It's set to auto, but without the hover, this is what it looks like. So this is part of our 3 steps hover actions. Okay, so now that I've set this, pretty much our design is complete. So I'm going to go ahead now and save this. I'm also going to publish this page, and then I'm going to exit the Visual Builder. Then we're going to test this and see if this works now. So if I hover over here, this should be our first hover step. So now, as you can see here, it's now revealed 1, 2, and 3. And notice what happens when I hover here on 1. It now reveals the rest of the information, hence the 3-step blurb reveal on hover. So there you have it. Thank you all for watching. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up and do follow us on our social media platforms. By doing so, you'll be notified every time we release new tutorials. Until next time, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.